and say hello to Shari and welcome. Are you there, Shari?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone.
All right, so the presenter controls are over to you. And I can see your screen. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Louise said, my name is Shari, and I am a search engine optimizer. But what a lot of people might not know about me is that I went to school in library and information science at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And I also worked in multiple libraries. I worked in special collections for many years at University of Hawaii. I've been an SEO professional for quite some time, 21 years. I also have considerable technical skills. I've been a designer for the same amount of time, and I still stay with the academic community. I am on the editorial advisory board for the ASLib Journal of Information Management, particularly the search articles, and I am also an editor, contributing editor as well. So I have a lot of experience, and probably the most important thing to know is that I understand that search results are far from perfect, whether it's Google, Yahoo, or Bing, or any type of site search engine, and I have firmly believed for many, many years is that librarians are the best people in the world to curate the web, because the skills needed to do really outstanding SEO are the skills that not librarians naturally have. And if we have time, I'll tell you a really cool story about my mom, who's a teacher and a reference librarian. So the series agenda, as Louise said, it's a 5-part series. What we're going to cover today is an overview, and parts 2 through 5 are going to cover details, things you can do to your site right away. But I will put some tips in here, and they are in your handouts. And this is what I hope to cover today. There's 10 things I'm going to ask you to remember. One of the first things is what SEO is, search engine optimization is and is not. There are so many myths and misconceptions surrounding this topic. There is a negative stereotype that exists around search engine optimization, and I want to address this right away. There are goals of search engine optimization that are beyond Google and beyond Yahoo, and they actually apply to our everyday work as librarians. And we'll go into a little detail for that. And then finally, I'll go over the 4 fundamental building blocks of SEO: text, keywords, and a labeling system; accessibility, which includes navigation and information architecture; link development, or the better term for it is link earning, commonly referred to as popularity; and searcher goals and behaviors. I have some good examples and some bad examples in this webinar, and I will pause for questions and answers, and if we have time, I have a little poll in this webinar. So let's start with something that has existed since SEO was invented around 20-some years ago. And that is its definition, or the perception of it, that search engine optimization is optimizing for web search engines only. It's not true. If you believe this definition, or a lot of people who do believe this definition, lean towards technology-centered design. And ultimately, technology-centered design is not going to satisfy your patrons or any of your users, because not everybody is a technologist. And ultimately, a lot of this leads to something called search engine spam. If you've heard of email spam, you've probably heard of search engine spam. And this is exactly what the people at Google, Yahoo, and Bing don't want. So this has never, ever been the correct perception of search engine optimization. Search engine optimization is actually optimizing for people who use search engines. And that's a very important difference, because the ultimate user is a human being. People use Google. People use site search engines. So whenever you write a website, code a website, design a website, you always focus on the human first, because ultimately it's going to be the human that's going to come into your library, or the human that's going to check out a document. A search engine might give you access to it, one of the ways you can access it to it, but the technology is not the end goal. So always think people first, technology second. Search engine optimization is making a site well, easily to use by people who use them. So very important point to remember. So when we look at the definition of search engine optimization, what you'll see on Google and Yahoo and Bing and other web search engines is the over-focus on marketing, the process of making web documents easy to find or easy to rank. And the goal is to be #1 on search engines for all the search engine queries all of the time. Well, that's not a realistic point of view, because documents are added to the web all of the time, documents are removed from the web all the time, documents are archived all of the time, so therefore search engine positions will always fluctuate. And this has been true, again, since the early to mid-90s. Ultimately, search engine optimization is about communicating, and the goal of search engine optimization is to make sure that the most appropriate content will appear at the top of search engine results. And search engines are perfect, so they might not get the right document all of the time in the #1 position, but if the right document is usually in the top 1 to 5 positions, that's usually considered as a success. Search engine optimization also includes how you can improve the appearance of a search listing. So if the search listing is more attractive, then maybe more people will click on it. So that is also part of the optimization process. And as search engines evolve, which they are constantly doing, appearance of search listings will change. So here's an example of a search where somebody is looking for pictures of the Tower of London. And something that a lot of people don't know about web search engines is that searcher goals and behavior is actually a ranking factor. So it's not a matter of putting as many keywords as possible into a document. It's also how well your document satisfies user goals. So these photos have been optimized quite well, I might say, for this particular search query. And this is something that's called a transactional search query, which we'll get to later on in this presentation. Another thing that search engines satisfy are informational goals, which is the most common type of search engine query, and it's a query where somebody wants to learn or know more about anything on the web. So when somebody types in the word definition or what is, Google will try to have dictionary sites, reputable dictionary sites, appear, and also the definition to appear right away at the top. On a site search engine, you will usually see something called a best bet. And this is from the National Cancer Institute, and we will come back to this example also later on in the presentation. So not only does search engine optimization apply to people as well as technology, it also applies to site search engines as well as web search engines. What I found over the 20 years that I've been working on websites is that the things you do to make your site better for Google, Yahoo, and Bing, or the flavor of the month search engine at the time, ultimately makes your site better for site search engines. And this what I came upon on accident, and over the years I found it's become more and more true, because part of the search engine optimization process is having a good labeling system. And if you have a good labeling system and you're using the user's language, you'll find that you're communicating better. not only to humans, but to technology. So ultimately, search engine optimization is about effective communication. So if we come back to this site search engine, which is on the National Cancer Institute site, we can see that the searcher typed the keywords breast cancer symptoms. Now this is on a desktop computer, and the thing is, if you look at these search results, this result, which is number 3, seems to be the most appropriate listing because you see the word symptoms. Symptoms is a big deal in the hypertext link to searchers because they want to go from search engine to the search listing to a web page that has the exact information that they want. This version up here, which they put under best bets, it says breast cancer treatment. It doesn't say breast cancer symptoms, it says breast cancer treatment, and it gives an abbreviation, PDQ, which patients and patient caregivers don't know what it is. And this one, this search listing underneath best bet also doesn't seem like it's a natural result. And if we look at this on a mobile phone, you can see that people aren't going to see the next listings at all. So the searcher experience on this site search engine is meh. They could do a better job. People will scroll. It's something very standard that people do on a mobile device. So they'll probably eventually see that third search listing. But there are some things the National Cancer Institute website could do a better job at in optimizing their web pages. So here is a site that does very well for something called navigational queries, which is a query where a person wants to go to a specific website, and an informational query, which is, again, I want to know or learn something more about a topic. In this case, it's the library's hours. Every library should have their hours front and center on search results page, web search engine and site search engine. So the searcher experience for this is fantastic, even though the searcher doesn't necessarily remember the name of the public library. But if we look at the Elgin Public Library hours, also in Illinois, we see 2 different search results, one for one location and one for another location. Even though the search results aren't quite the same, it's still a good searcher experience because the searcher got their query answered immediately. Now, if the person remembered, the searcher remembered, Gail Borden Library Hours, which is the name is the Elgin Library, that's out by me, this would also be a positive search experience because they can very clearly see the hours here as well the hours here in the Google Knowledge Graph listings. Now let's look at my alma mater, University of Illinois. And for those of you who've never met me, which I'm sure most of you haven't, my master's degree is in Asian Studies Japanese. So I practically lived in the Asian library for many years. And if you looked at these search listings, I took a screenshot of this, and Louise can contest that when we looked a couple days ago at this page, University of Minnesota was on top, so we have no idea what the people at Google were thinking. But in this case, we look at these search listings. Which search listing is the best one to click on? Or if a person doesn't want to click on a search listing, why not? Well, the third search listing seems to be the most appropriate because we see some hours. But just for kicks and giggles, we're going to click on the search result. And we see the Asian Library, a sea full of black text, and we see the hours. Now, when women scan pages, they tend to look at the whole page. Men tend to look at search results pages very differently, that they tend to be more linear. And since this was a female that was doing the search results page, the person looked at the listing underneath the hours. Asian Library relocates. So we click on the listing, find the Japanese library, and here are the hours, Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 p.m. Now, if this person goes to the library sometimes between 8 and 5, the person's going to have a good search experience because the hours are correct. But what if the person decides to show up to the Japanese collection library at 8:30 a.m.? Well, it's going to be a bad search experience because it's not open yet. And this is something that a search engine optimizer stays on top of. He or she will look how search listings appear on the web, see how search listings appear on the own website, and if the correct information is not displaying, they will do what they can to fix it. So another thing to know about search engine optimization is that it is actually part of a positive user experience. There are a lot of different definitions and interpretations of user experience. As I showed before, when I introduced myself, I was on the board of directors of the User Experience Professionals Association. And this is the definition of user experience that I find to be the most all-encompassing. And this comes from Peter Morville's book, Search Patterns. And if you search on Google for user experience honeycomb, you can see this very same honeycomb. And here you will see findability. That is where search engine optimization squarely sits, because people find and locate information on the web via browsing, which is clicking on a link from website to another, searching, which is filling out a search query, and asking their social group. So, what do I want you to remember about this first part? Big thing, SEO is not optimizing for search engines only. In fact, if you go down this path, you're going to find that you're optimizing for technology and you're usually forgetting about people. Search engine optimization is optimizing for people who use search engines, and even though marketing is a part of SEO, when you look at the big picture, SEO is about communication, effective communication to both humans, which would be your patrons and your parents, as well as teenagers and children, as well as technology. So I just wanted to pause here and see if there were any questions about this first part.
Hi, Shari. No questions yet. So just a reminder to everyone that if you have questions, type them into the questions box at any time, and we'll address those before we wrap up.
And I will show you the link to the user experience honeycomb. This is something that Google does get right. You can see it here if you scroll down the page, and what each of these elements mean. Okay? So the goals of search engine optimization. You might be surprised that search engine optimization isn't only about Google. It also overlaps heavily with information architecture. It overlaps heavily with web development and programming, and it overlaps heavily with user experience design. And so these are our goals. Our goals aren't necessarily to be number one all the time, but our goals are certainly these four things. So one of the first goals is to label website content so that it's easy to find. It's easy to find, locate, and discover. And there are three different types of labeling systems. There's content labels, there are navigation labels, and there are document labels. And we'll go over this in great detail in part 2. And what I'm going to do is show you some examples of labels and show you some examples of where labels can be improved, and also show you some examples of labels that are really, really well done. So this first label is a graphic image, and I know it's a graphic image because it ends with JPG, which stands for JPEG, and it's a type of a graphic image that is commonly used on the web, and it's from the Berkeley Library. What is it? Does anybody know what this is? 7022.jpg is not a label that anyone who does search engine optimization would ever recommend. Search engines don't know what this label means. Humans don't know what this label means. Therefore, it's not very easy for a search engine to determine what this particular graphic image is about. So I will show you a little bit more of this. And I've just covered up something. Do you still know what it is? No, because we really don't have any indication. And if I take this out, we can see that it's fragments of medical work, but we don't know what these abbreviations mean. We don't know, Anno Domini, we probably know what it means, but we don't know what language, we don't know what library this is in. And at this point in time, search engines and other technologies are unlikely to understand what this label means. So how would we make this label better? Well, if this is called fragments of a medical work, maybe they should name the label fragments-medical-work.jpg. At least it will provide some context for a search engine to properly interpret, as well as a searcher. So let's look at another example, and this is from Mayo Clinic. And a clue, again, is going to be the URL up here and the file name, which we see right here. What do you think this is? Well, there are a couple words that make sense, such as the word media, images, and cataracts. So maybe it's a graphic image of cataracts. This is very strange, JPEG.png. PNG, again, is a type of graphic image. So it's not very good. And this is something we do in website usability called an expectancy test, where we would put something up on a screen and we ask users, what do you think this is? And we present it to them and we ask them to write it down or type it in. And then we don't show them what it is, because what happens in a usability test is people go, they say, oh yeah, that's what I meant. Well, if they really meant it, they would have typed it in. So just know that about expectancy tests if you ever do one. It's not a picture of cataracts, but it is a picture of what happens to your vision if you have cataracts. So the information sent and the aboutness of this graphic image is a little bit better. But I wouldn't have a URL structure or a file name that is this long. I certainly wouldn't have a percentage sign in the URL structure. And something we'll get into in part 2 is that hyphens are definitely better than underscores. So let's move on to an example, which is much, much better. So what do you think this is? And I will enlarge the clue number 1. Gail Borden Library Collections, eBooks and Audiobooks. That looks pretty accurate. This is the title of this, because this looks like it's going to be a web page. And what's great about this is whoever optimized this website did something called front loading. And front loading is something that I have the URL for this from Nielsen Norman Group. Nielsen Norman Group is a really good site to bookmark and to subscribe to. Front loading is putting the most important words at the front, because humans in right side and left side, humans read from left to right, Westerners in particular. And when I took Japanese and Chinese, people looked at items in very different ways. So how I would arrange things on a web page would be very different. And if we actually look at this page, you can see that ebooks and audiobooks is here in the heading, collections is highlighted, and it is also here in the navigation. So this would be a positive user experience for the labels on this particular web page. So good for Gail Borden, yay. Second thing, that search professionals are concerned with is organizing and connecting website content so that it's easy to find, easy to locate, easy to discover. So what we're talking about is website navigation, a website's information architecture, archiving, which is extremely important. In fact, a quick tip I can give you, for those of you that use WordPress, is please don't use WordPress's default archiving system. It is not very search engine friendly, but it isn't that difficult to modify to make it more search engine friendly. And we will talk about this for part 3. So again, the things to remember: information architecture, site navigation, and technical architecture, which is the translation of the previous 2 things into HTML code, programming, scripting, coding, and all that fun stuff. As a preview, we're going to talk about the 5 different types of website navigation, and these are global, local, utilities if needed. They usually are. Contextual linking, which is extremely important, and wayfinders, which is supplemental navigation. And again, this is something that librarians are excellent at, is wayfinders. So we'll go over in detail how to optimize these different parts of navigation in part 3. The book for this is called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web, or Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond, and I highly, highly, highly recommend purchasing this book. If you're a dead tree kind of book person like me, get the dead tree version book. If you're an ebook person, go ahead and get the ebook. I happen to have them both. The next thing is accessibility. Search engines cannot interpret your content unless they have access to that content. So one of the things that search professionals do is ensuring that both searchers, humans, as well as search engines, have access to desired content. And we do that via some of the things I just showed you: the file name, the URL structure, and the site navigation. And it applies to text-based documents as well as non-text-based documents. So if a person is looking for a picture of an Eiffel Tower photo, we need to make sure that the labeling system for the graphic images, as well as any page that contains a graphic image, is properly optimized. And also to consider a thesaurus. So if we go back to Google, I don't know if any of you have seen this tilde search. You put a tilde sign and you put Eiffel Tower. You put the tilde sign in front of the word. You want to find the synonym for photos. And you'll see Eiffel Tower is highlighted. Eiffel Tower, the word photos. The word images is also highlighted. Photos, a lot of time I will see the word photo. Here's the word picture. So if you want to get a sense of what synonyms that a search engine is using, use a tilde search. It is very, very handy when you're trying to find out how Google, Yahoo, and Bing work. Search engines also look at PDF documents. PDF documents tend to rank well, and they tend to perform very well, and the reason for that is they don't have a lot of junk on them. A lot of pages and a lot of page template designs use carousels and sliders and all kinds of animation, which might seem cool at first, but for return visitors, they tend to get annoying. And a PDF document doesn't have all of that stuff. So if a web page doesn't do well, sometimes a PDF version of it will do well as in addition to the other ones. For the Center for Disease Control, we found that PDFs did quite well for the site search engine. So don't rule them out. Search engine optimization does not only apply to text-based documents, such as PDFs and HTML files. It does apply to JPEGs and PNGs and PowerPoint and Word documents and sound documents. So labeling systems for all of these are part of the optimization process. And then the last thing that search engine optimization professionals are concerned with is limiting or preventing access to undesirable content. Undesirable content can be many, many different things. I'm going to show you 3 examples of them. The first one is something called orphaned content. Search engines usually don't show orphaned content in search results, and the reason for that is if you didn't link to something very much in your website navigation, you must not have thought it was important, or else you wouldn't have linked to it. And if content is so good that it should be linked to, a search engine optimization professional will take that content and unorphan it. So here's an example from an information architecture website, and somebody made a decision to put the glossary or the dictionary, and just so you know, dictionary gets searched for more commonly than glossary, in a pop-up window. So there's a drop-down menu, and we can click something like accessibility, and here's our alignment. I used alignment, my apologies. And you see the definition here. But what happens if the person closes this window? And by the way, as a usability professional, not everybody knows that the X closes the window. Well, I want to show you an example of it that I actually found on Google. So here's my buddy Lloyd. Lloyd says, please close this window. Thanks. So what did Lloyd forget to do? Forgot to show me how to close this window. And I actually found this page in Google. What would happen if Lloyd did give us a way to close this window? It would close the browser. So now not only would you close the link to the website, you would also close the link to Google. So orphaned content is a no-no when it comes to search engine optimization. Another thing that is very, very unhelpful for search engines is something called duplicate content. And duplicate content has different meanings, but these are the words in this bulleted list that I would be on the lookout for. If I hear personalization, site search engine, tagged content, sorting options, all these things, there's the possibility that the website could be delivering duplicate content to a web search engine or a site search engine. And why is this bad? Well, first of all, it's going to mean that you're going to have to do a lot of extra work or hire somebody to do a lot of extra work to manage this duplicate content. The ultimate result is less items, less documents are available to rank, and a lot of times the right page, the most appropriate document, is not available to rank because too much duplicate content is being delivered to a search engine. So be aware of that. Be aware of that. If you're using any of these things on your website, you might have to work with a search engine optimizer to help you minimize this impact. So here's an example of a site. I actually had to go to an e-commerce site because, thank goodness, I didn't find any of this on a librarian website. I ended up finding this on Wayfair. So we can see that it has sort, recommended, customer rating. You can view by grid, you can view by list. All of these are duplicate content to a search engine because it's just the same content being presented in different ways. So if you're using this kind of format anywhere on your site, be aware that you're going to have to do a little extra work. Another item that could add extra work is anytime there's faceted classification. This causes a lot of problems with the search engine. And again, this will cause a lot of extra work that might not be necessary if people can find content in different ways. The third example is an example, of course, I don't recommend, and that's called search engine spam. And I like a colleagues of mine definition that it's creating pages deliberately to trick search engines into delivering inappropriate redundant, or poor quality search results. I have included a link here to Google to give you more recent updates. And search engine spam is tricky. We kind of think that search engine spam always looks like this, but search engine spam can be a network of websites that all belong to the same company. I'm a designer. I could make this page look really, really gorgeous, even though this is search engine spam. But the bottom line about search engine spam is it's demeaning the user experience. It's demeaning the searcher experience because the best content isn't available to rank in a search engine. So search engines actively work to get rid of this type of content. It's an ongoing cat and mouse game. It's an ongoing process, and that's another reason that you see search engine results pages change all the time. So if you're working with a search engine specialist, there's a term or terms you want to hear. You want to work with somebody who's a white hat SEO, and there are many of them. I am probably one of the whitest hat SEOs, and the ones who make all the link farms and the doorway pages and the fake everything. Those are called black hat SEOs, and in the business world, they're very, very common. And that's one of the reasons that librarians curating the web is so important, because librarian websites and library websites actually have a lot of value to patrons, not just the library itself, but the library website. And the more we can curate and provide good resources to our patrons, the better the web can be. So I think it's really important to work with the search engine specialist if you don't have the skills or aptitude, or to learn the skills yourself. And that brings me to the poll question. Do we have time for a poll, Louise?
Oh, sure. I think we've got time. Let me go ahead and launch that poll. So the question is, what has been your overall experience with SEO? If it's positive, negative, neutral, or if you have little or no experience. And I'm going to give about 30 seconds to let you click, and I'll share the results with everybody. Got about 8 seconds left. 5. All right, we've had about 80% of you voted, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and I'll share the results. So, Shari, I'm not sure if you can see this on your side, but 19% of our audience have had a positive experience with SEO, 5% negative, 29% are neutral, and almost half, 48%, say they have little or no experience with SEO.
Wow, that's nice to see, because there's such a negative stereotype for search engine optimization that I like to see this, but I would like to see librarians have more experience in the SEO arena, because the skills that are required for library science are also the very skills that are needed for SEO. So that's nice to see. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for sharing your experience with us. And so coming back to the webinar, these are what I want you to remember about what SEO professionals do. Yes, if you have a marketing aspect of SEO, rankings are going to have some degree of importance, but it's not ranking just for the sake of ranking. It's ranking because the most appropriate document is appearing in search results. And in order to do that, you have to make sure your website has a very, very good labeling system. And the 3 labeling systems that we're going to talk about in part 2 are content labels, navigation labels, and document labels. Also, having a good site navigation and information architecture, which is organizing and connecting website content. Making sure search engines as well as searchers have access to desired content, and also limiting or preventing search engines from undesirable content. That last one does require considerable technical skills. I'm not saying that there aren't technical librarians, and I love technical librarians. I love working with them. They're a great group, and they could do this themselves. And Google certainly has a lot of help documents for it, but just know that limiting access to undesirable content is something that's more technical than the average search engine optimization. So are there any questions about those 4 things at this point?
Hi, Shari. No, not at this point. I think people are just kind of maybe sitting back, absorbing all this information. But I'll put another shout out to everyone that please, you know, if you have questions, even the littlest question, please go ahead and type that into your questions box, and we'll come back to questions at the end of the session.
Okay, great. Right. So next I want to talk about the fundamental building blocks of search engine optimization. And this is where if you go on to Google, you are going to see everything under the sun. You'll see, I think the one that I see the most is called the periodic table of SEO success factors. And my undergraduate degree is in genetics and developmental biology, also from the University of Illinois. You can tell I was meant to be a librarian. I have too many interests. If I'm a librarian, I can find everything I want to find. This I see a lot. I see a lot of complex infographics about this stuff. What I would tell you is if it interests you, by all means read it, but I want to simplify this for everybody. And what I've been able to do is break this down into 4 different items. And it's these. I call this text, accessibility, validation, and searchers. Keywords, labeling, and copywriting. Do your digital documents contain the words and phrases that people type into search queries? In other words, are they properly labeled? Do you have a labeling system in place? And are you using the user's language? I think what's really interesting when I work on library websites is that even librarians have jargon, and they speak in jargon, and they don't always realize it. And it's very easy to lapse into that jargon when you're on your own website. I'm guilty of it as well. So having an outside person help you with that is not a bad idea. And usually you get the hang of it. Librarians are very good at getting the hang of labeling systems quite well. The next thing is accessibility. Do search engines, as well as users, have easy, user-friendly access to your content? And also, as I mentioned before, are you limiting or preventing access to undesirable content? Because search engines can't interpret the words on the pages. They can't interpret the words in your document surrogates if you don't give them access to that content. So this is where search engine friendly design comes in, and that's what we're going to talk about in part 3. The third thing I like to call is validation, because search engines, and this was true long before Google was invented, and I can remember this back in the 90s, is link development. We prefer to call it link earning. That might just be marketing hype, but link development is getting objective third-party links pointing to your website, not only to your home page, but also to your pages within your website. Now here's a tip for those of you that have calendars on your library sites. Be very, very careful about calendars, because calendar software can crash a search engine. And if the calendar software crashes the search engine, it's less likely to come back to that page. So that calendar section might be an area where you might want to limit or prevent accessibility to. And I am more than happy to take a look at anybody's calendar. Just email me and I'll just say yes or no. if that's something that needs to be prevented. So link development is where librarians have a lot of power, because library websites, whether they're academic libraries or public libraries, school libraries, tend to be trusted more. And I'm not talking about, you know, Bob's frat party at a university website. I'm talking about an actual library section of a website. These can be great repositories for great resources, and this is where librarians can have a great deal of power in curating the web, and we're going to talk about this in great detail in part 5. Social media optimization is different than link development. Social media optimization in Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Instagram, they're not a ranking factor. They could influence rankings, because if something becomes very popular via social media, you might get more links to your website. But right now, as it stands, social media is only a signal, but it is not an actual ranking factor. So think of number 3 as validation. Other third parties are validating that your site is good. The last one, and I think the most important one, is searcher behaviors. Does your website accommodate known searcher goals and behaviors? Does your site search engine accommodate known searcher goals and behaviors? And this has been a ranking factor, again, since the early to mid-90s. And it's really important to know what these web searcher behaviors are. And before I jump into that, that's here. We want to see how search engine optimizers treat these things. So keywords, your labeling system, accessibility, site architecture, and navigation is considered on the page or on-page criteria, because this is what you as a website owner have complete control over. And you might not think you have control over it, but the people who make search engines think you have control over it. Things like link development and searcher goals are called off the page or off-page criteria, because these are things that you don't have complete control over. You don't have control over what a searcher's goal is. You don't have control over the websites that link to you. It's when on-the-page criteria and off-the-page criteria validate each other that a site tends to do well in search engines. And I've worked on sites, just government sites, public library sites, all those things for many, many years, and I find that sites that have this balance tend to do well in search engines for many, many years, especially if a really good archiving plan is in place. So very quickly I'll go over what the searcher goals are for the web, and this is what I want you to remember. Go, know, and do. Go, know, and do is something that the people at Google came up with. There was the people at Yahoo that came up with this taxonomy of web search. Navigational queries are the second most common type of search engine query, both on mobile devices and on desktop devices. A navigational query is a query in which a person wants to go to a specific website. So an example of a navigational query would be the name of a library. And you can also tell this is, Google considered this a navigational query because you see the appearance of these items appearing here. Collections, hours and addresses, movies and games, very well done. So good for Gale Borden Library. Now, navigational queries are very, very difficult to displace in positions 1, 2, and 3 because searchers rarely go past those positions if they have navigational intent. Know is informational. Think question words. What, where, why, who, when. Lists are an example of informational queries. Informational queries are the most common type of search engine query, both on desktop as well as mobile. And quick fact queries are extremely common on mobile devices. So here's an example of an informational query. And we know this is an informational query because of the appearance of a question word. So I thought it was very interesting that Japanese collections, University of Illinois, and University of Hawaii, where I used to work in the special collections area. So I don't know how Google knew that, but I just thought it was funny. The least common type of search engine query is a transactional query, and that's where a person wants to do something. Download a PDF, listen to some music, get some lyrics. And for those of you that are attending all of the series, one of my handouts is going to be a really nice bibliography of web searcher goals and behaviors, so you can have this information readily available. So if we go back to Google and somebody puts in photos of the Issei Shrine, the word photo, the word pictures, images, all of these things, music, all indicate transactional intent. And this is why you will see images appear at the top of search engine queries for words related to the word photo. So what do I want you to remember? Well, I want you to remember 10 things, and that is, the first one, which is hugely important, is that SEO is not only about search engines. SEO is about people who use search engines. People first, search engines second. If you concentrate on people and using the user's language and understanding their mental models, your site will do much better in search engines, and your site search engine results will be more accurate. There is definitely a marketing aspect to SEO, but ultimately it's about effective communication to your users and your patrons, as well as to different technologies. The goals of SEO, of course, ranking is a concern, but it's organizing, labeling, and connecting website content. It's enabling accessibility to desirable content and limiting and preventing accessibility to undesirable content. And then finally, those 4 building blocks. It's okay if you want to use other items that are available on the web, but these are pretty easy to understand. And if you can understand these 10 things, you'll probably have a really, really, really good focus on what search engine optimization is all about. So we have time for questions. That's my email, and I actually look like that. I usually have a blonde bob that's varying lengths throughout the year. Please feel free to ask me questions. If you want me to take a quick look at your calendar, I can tell you if you should limit or prevent access to it or if it's fine. And I hope you can join us for the rest of the series, because I love librarians, particularly reference librarians, and thank you all for attending and listening. We have time, about 5 minutes for questions.
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Shari. That was really helpful to get an overview of SEO, and I look forward, and I hope everyone in attendance is looking forward to getting, more details in the weeks to come. I did get one question come in about the calendars. This particular library uses eVanced. Are you familiar with eVanced calendars? Would they be ones that crash search engines or not?
Let's take a look. Oh, by the way, what I tell people to do is, if you don't want me to look at something personally on your site, have me look at your competitor. Then I can say anything I want about this. So do you know which one it is? Products?
I don't know if they...
Calendar.
The calendar. Well, the person who asked the question, she said she's not afraid for you to look at her library's website. I could give you a specific website if you'd like.
Sure.
It's the berwynlibrary.org/events, or if you want to find their page.
Yes, and how many of you think this? Is this a navigational, informational, or transactional query, and why? So this would actually be a test question. This would be a navigational query because I want to go to a specific place on a website.
So a lot of libraries use the Event software for their events calendar, and there's some other products that they offer as well. So this is a good example for many libraries.
It's fine. It will not crash a search engine. However, the archiving on it is not very good. So I would recommend having a different way of archiving your events if you do archive your events. But otherwise, it's fine. It would not crash a search engine.
All right. Well, I hope that helps the person who asked that question. If you have anything to follow up, please let me know. Oh, she asked if you would look at the full calendar. Do you see under filter by, it says go to the full calendar?
Event time, okay.
There we go. Maybe that'll help.
This one will. The full calendar will.
Okay.
So just filter this. You could do that with robots exclusion. So robotstext.org. And that would be that's how you would do it.
You could test the website using that, test the calendar using that website?
You can exclude it by using robots.txt. Okay. So the problem is this, because there's always a previous and there's always a next, so a search engine is going to keep going and going and going in all of these links, and it'll eventually crash. And we want people to go to these, which are not a problem, but the full calendar is.
Gotcha.
So as long as you have this, you're fine. Full calendar, that's what to look for, is this previous, next year, next year, next year. This is what ends up crashing a search engine. That was a very good question.
All right. Thank you. So she asked for right now, they're okay, right? Yes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, I would robots exclude this. I'm sure
the full calendar.
site.
Yeah. Okay. There is another question that came up, just kind of curious about the upcoming sessions. She asked, will we discuss ways to help our patrons search a library's website versus the calendar, or catalog, apologies. So search the website versus the catalog. They don't have a lot of control over, a catalog, because that's, usually purchased by a third party. Will you be discussing that? Are you focusing anything on the catalog searches, or what we can do to help with catalog searches?
Well, I can absolutely add that. So
Okay.
I'm just writing it down. And because everything I'm doing in this webinar series is about searcher experience. It's not just about making Google happy. It's about making patrons happy. So I will absolutely put that in there.
All right. And then you mentioned a book about optimization. Could you repeat the title, please?
There's multiple books. There's my book, so you just type my name in, but my colleague, Eric Enga, is, he's an amazing guy, and he's a Viking like me. This is a good book.
Okay.
So I would definitely listen to a lot of the advice in there. My books are fine, but the screenshots are outdated. If you want to know about searcher behaviors, that's this book, Search Meets Web Usability.
Okay. All right. So we're at 2:30. So we had one last question. Somebody asked if the question and answer will be part of the recording, and yes, the whole entire session was recorded, and I will try to get that up on our Rails archives page as soon as possible, and I will send everyone an email to let you know um, when it's ready. And I think we'll go ahead and wrap up because we've gotten to our time. So thank you so much, Shari, for your time today. And thank you everyone for joining us. And I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar, and we will see you next week for part 2 at 1:30. So thank you everybody. Have a good day.
You.
Bye, Shari. Thanks.